This has got to be the end of it, right? I think Nintendo has officially turned away a chunk of every demographic of Switch user. All that was really remaining were the power users. The only subset of fans that were still pretty tied to this thing were the power users. And with the breakdown of the specs of the Switch 2 from Digital Foundry, I'm assuming at least a subset of people that were excited for the powerful new tablet might have reached their limit as well. So as a bit of a quick summary, we're looking at an 8-core GPU versus a 4 that was on the Switch 1, 12GB of RAM versus 3GB of RAM, 1536 CUDA cores versus 256 on the Switch. Is it pronounced CUDA or is it CUDA? I've always just said CUDA, like Barracuda. So it's definitely faster than the Switch 1, which should be great if you're looking to play indie games for another 5 years. The clock speeds are pretty low too for a CPU of this generation, but I mean, in fairness, this is a typical Nintendo iteration. This is what happens when they don't innovate. This is actually pretty unsurprising. If anything, this is kind of what I expected from the Switch 2 when they said it was just going to be a bigger Switch 1. I just didn't expect that they were going to be upping the prices of everything across the board. Because when they started talking about the price of the console, the price of the games, and all of the other fun little discussions that we've had over the past month, really the assumption was that this was all going to be worth it because we were going to be getting a stronger console. Which, yeah, relative to the Switch 1, we did get a stronger console, but it's the most underwhelming, typical Nintendo style of stronger console. And I am not remotely surprised by this at all. I feel like a lot of people that had the Switch 1 and were excited for a stronger Switch seemingly were not Nintendo fans before, because a lot of people had much higher expectations than what we just received. But no, this is exactly what I was saying would happen. We get an upgrade, but it's an underwhelming upgrade, not worthy of the price. And I like how the bar has kind of been lowered over the past month. At first we were talking about a console that would be slightly weaker than the PS5 and the Series X. And then we said we would get something that runs similarly to the Series S. And we ended up landing somewhere between the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. Because, yeah, Nintendo. 3GB of RAM is going to be going towards the game chat feature. A feature locked behind a paywall, need I remind you. The Switch 2 is going to run at 102GB per second. The Series S runs at 224GB per second. That's the Series S, the weaker one. The performance is going to be worse than that thing. This is somehow going to lead to people saying that 9GB of RAM are magically better than 16GB of RAM, the same way that they said Nintendo's LCD would be better than an OLED. And yet, people are expecting ray tracing. The memory bandwidth is going to be running at 68GB per second handheld and 102GB per second docked. That is slower than the base PlayStation 4. Look, you guys can look at the actual Digital Foundry stuff to get a further breakdown on the specs. But I think this is going to be the end of the line for a lot of people. And this very well might be the final nail in the coffin for the Nintendo Switch 2. And before you say, oh no, all the Nintendo shills will buy it, no, they won't. That's kind of been the point. A lot of them will, but a lot of them are already turned away. Some Nintendo shills got turned away because of a lack of innovation. They didn't want just a Switch 2. Part of the fun of being a Nintendo fan was the innovation that comes with new console generations. But again, this is only a portion of the Nintendo fans. So a portion of them were lost basically as soon as they mentioned it was going to be called a Switch 2, because we knew it was just going to be more Switch. Another portion was lost with the price, be it the price of the games or the price of the console. There are a lot of Nintendo fans that are Nintendo fans because of the affordability. They go to the store, it's the cheapest console, they buy it. And then they'll pick up like 1 or 2 Nintendo games a year, and that's good enough. And it doesn't matter how many people say, well, yeah, it's a $450 investment that's gonna last you 5 to 10 years, so it's worth that money when you calculate it that way. Yeah, no, that's not how people think about this. Psychologically, it's cheaper, you buy it. It's more expensive, you don't. These are the same people that will spend $60 on a 7-hour games. They don't use the dollar per hour approach to this stuff. Again, a lot of people are okay with the $450 price tag, but as soon as you put it up there, close enough with the bigwigs, it becomes a competition. A competition that Nintendo has historically won because their price is lower. And even if you wanted to yield that, they upped the prices of the accessories, they upped the prices of the games, everything else became significantly more expensive. A lot of people already were upset with how expensive everything was going to be around the Switch. So now with the Switch 2, I think it's safe to say you lost a lot of Nintendo fans in that regard as well. And if you want to expand on that, the fanboys aren't the only ones affected by these two things. The casual blue ocean fandom, the people that don't watch reviews and gaming stuff, generally speaking, they're also the ones that buy into Nintendo because the innovation becomes popular, like the motion controls, the touchscreen, the hybrid console. So with the Switch 2 lacking innovation, and also being close enough in price with the other big guns in the industry, yeah, I would think it's safe to assume that you also lost a chunk of that potential group. What remains are the Nintendo fanboys that specifically just wanted a stronger Switch. And I would argue they are still the group that's going to buy it. And they're probably the only group that's going to buy it. Because I think there were a lot of fans that weren't Nintendo fanboys that actually did just want a modern day style Switch 2. But those people are very critical of what they define as modern day. They won't cut slack towards the Switch 2. They will compare it to every other device that they own. They take this stuff very seriously. And now they're going to see a console that in their minds is for nothing but indie games, which they already own enough of, either on their Steam Deck or on their Nintendo Switch 1. At this point, it's kind of bittersweet, because psychologically at first I was rah-rah against Nintendo, since I felt like they were catering more towards the hardcore gamer crowd than they were towards us, the subset of the fandom that purchased the Wii U on launch date, that purchased the 3DS on launch date, and will go out of our way to buy almost every single first-party Nintendo title because Nintendo makes us warm and happy and just all that good stuff, right? But then the Switch 2 was dropped, and it turns out that they just made it very strong, and in order to keep up with all of that strength and brute force and raw power, they were going to have to up the price on everything and give up all types of consumer rights in order to make it a modern-day gaming console. But now I'm looking at this tablet that looks like, 2018-ish technology maybe for a handheld, and I'm actually starting to like it. Now I feel like this is a Nintendo console. This is the Switch Pro that we wanted 5 years ago. This is the OLED that we got, but we didn't get a power dock to make it go up to 4K. It's funny, I'm almost nostalgic seeing people make fun of how weak this thing is, and it makes me love it more. Not because I love weaker hardware, but it just gives me all those fun memories of people talking about how weak the Switch was and how weak the Wii was, and I was just able to have my good time with those consoles. But those consoles came in at a price point much lower than the competition. Those consoles didn't come in and say that our games are going to be more expensive than the standard game prices. And while the Switch definitely walked the line when it comes to costs of accessories, for example, but those consoles didn't come in with everything involving the system being ludicrously higher than they should have been. So despite the fact that now I actually do feel like the Switch 2 is a very typical Nintendo console, all the politics around the Switch 2, the economic factors around the Switch 2, no longer make it feel like it is worthy of being a Switch console. You sacrificed a large subset of the Nintendo fandom that is in it for all of the practices that we've become accustomed to with Nintendo. You sacrifice that subset of the fandom for the hardcore crowd, the mainstream crowd, the ones that own PlayStation 5s at home, the ones that own an Xbox Series X at home, and the ones that own a Steam Deck or a strong PC, or a combination of all of those. You went to please them, and you couldn't even do that right. Just to name off a few fun features, or lack thereof. There is no VRR in docked mode. They advertise the VRR, but even if you have a TV that supports it, you can't use it, because the DisplayPort to the HDMI adapter that they used doesn't support HDMI VRR. They cheaped out and got the HDMI 2.0 ports instead of the 2.1 ports. which also effectively means that 4K 120 will not be possible docked. That's why it's limited to handheld. And it's actually funny because the docked mode has a lower CPU clock speed than handheld. Yeah, the CPU is faster in handheld than it will be docked. Even in the Digital Foundry article, they addressed it, but they just kind of speculated about it for a few minutes. Speaking of which, it's actually kind of funny to see people turning against Digital Foundry now. Digital Foundry is usually considered reputable when it comes to this stuff, but now that they are criticizing the specs of the Switch 2, their integrity is being questioned. So that's a thing now. But in fairness, this kind of toxicity is always to be expected around the launch of a new gaming console. That's just the way society works, unfortunately. And I think a lot of Nintendo fans, the ones that have specifically unapologetically been defending the Switch 2 since the reveal till now, they're about to lose a large chunk of the populace that has been on their side. Because for them, they still have the Nintendo expectation mindset. I don't think they're looking at this console and thinking it's weaker than it needs to be. If anything, I'm pretty in line with their view of this console. I've said it from the beginning, and I realize that many of you are new here from when I broke down the Direct, and many of you probably did not watch my Direct breakdown because that's before I turned to the dark side. Mind you, I have just about triple my subscriber count in the past month, which is awesome. I haven't had a chance to make a journey to 10,000 subs video, and I've already reached 15,000 subs. So at this rate, I might as well work on a journey to 20,000 subs and just release that when I hit 20, because at the rate that I'm growing, this is phenomenal. Thank you all so much, but that's kind of a side point. Back when the Switch 2 was revealed, my simple Nintendo fan mind loved pretty much everything that I had seen, but I was enjoying it from the lens of a Nintendo fan. And part of being a Nintendo fan was enjoying the console for its simplicity, for the optimization, for the gaming experience. But they overstepped it with the greed, and that greed is what has turned me away. I still am very much a Nintendo fan. I am still somebody that wants to play Donkey Kong Bonanza, but I will not be ripped off to do so. And that's where I differentiate from the other Nintendo fans that are in support of this console. I think we're still eye to eye on the experience, but what we're not eye to eye on is the tolerance level for the corporation, and Nintendo just had never reached my limit yet at that point. The unfortunate thing for Nintendo now is over the past month, they've made me so disgusted by them that even if they drop the price, I don't even know if I would go and buy it immediately. I might not even buy it at all. I might end up buying it used, which is what I've been saying. Now that I'm so disturbed by the way the entire gaming industry is, my whole brain might have just exploded over the past month. So for all I know, unless something immensely drastic happens, I may never give another dollar to Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft for the rest of my life at this rate. But the point is that with this upgraded Switch into the Switch 2, I actually think this is very consistent with how Nintendo operates. This is how I am used to Nintendo operating, but I have not been used to the price gouging to this extent. I can accept that many people, the limit was reached a long time ago. I bought Super Mario 3D All-Stars, I was happy to buy it. Zelda Link's Awakening, $60, I was happy to buy it. Although I think I got it on like a special on Amazon. But the point is that I will buy these games at full price because they are experiences that are worth it to me at that dollar value. And I realize this is something that's very hard to grasp for many people, but there are $60 games that I find more worth it to me, even if they only take me 5 hours to beat, versus a $60 game with the highest end specs on a PlayStation 5 that would take somebody 100 hours to beat. But the difference was when I was buying those games, I was viewing them at the standard price of gaming. A game costs $60. But Nintendo is introducing this idea to me now that a game is worth more because I want it more or because I'll spend more time on it. So now they've opened my eyes to analyzing the game value and making me question if it's worth the dollar amount because they implemented the idea of variable rates. But basically, in conclusion of all this, Nintendo is releasing a Nintendo Switch 2. It is very clearly a Nintendo Switch 2. They have certainly not appealed towards the hardcore crowd. They are keeping it in a very similar practice to what Nintendo has always done. This, for me, is a Nintendo console, but their price gouging and their greedy practices, and in many ways their behavior that is worse than the modern gaming society is at the moment, that's the line that they crossed. And by crossing that line, they lost a lot of Nintendo fans and a lot of casual fans. And by not going all the way and giving the hardcore power users what they were looking for, they won't nearly gain enough of them to make up for what they just lost. With every passing week, I become more confident that the Switch 2 is going to perform very poorly, at least until we get our price drops on the consoles, the games, the accessories, or some combination of those. So yeah, I'm excited. And you know what? If you are somebody that canceled your pre-order because of this news, leave a comment about it. I'd be interested in seeing if people that see this console is weaker than they expected are now going to cancel that pre-order. Because I'm obviously just making a lot of assumptions and a lot of guesses. I don't have magic powers, I can't see the future. So it would be cool to get some actual data. Either way, thanks again for joining me, and I will catch you guys on the next one.